have always had a great relationship with my wife Claire and our two lovely children, and we have been happily married for 8 years. Our children Ben and Cindy are 5 and 4 years old respectively, and Claire is 7 months pregnant with our long-awaited daughter. As a professionally educated biologist, I work in the laboratory of a reputable bioscience company, which not only pays me well, but I also derive great pleasure from my work. At first, I dismissed it as yet another meaningless letter, as our family receives such documents on a regular basis, and at first I wanted to just throw the document away, but I changed my mind and decided to open the envelope to see what was inside. A letter from a legal representative representing the wife of my wife's former coworker, reporting the sad news that she had formally filed for divorce and that my wife was listed as a party to the divorce. I don't need to explain my emotions after reading the letter. My once perfect marriage and life seemed to have been mercilessly shattered, leaving an endless trail of debris in its wake. I did my best to maintain the appearance of a normal life while my wife took the kids shopping. When they returned, we cooked dinner and spent the evening together as usual, 30p. On weekdays, my wife and I usually stayed up until 11:30 p.m. That night, after putting the children to bed, we sat side by side on the couch, and I felt a rush of excitement as I took her hand and gently asked her to join me, and together we went to my office, which was located next to the family room, and, closing the door behind me, I took the letter out of the drawer and handed it to her. She wrapped her arms tightly around my waist, seeking solace and love, and buried her head in my chest, clinging desperately to me, sobbing and apologizing repeatedly, worried that our children might hear. I calmly asked her to keep her voice down, and despite my attempts to understand her, she refused to let go and stop crying. In fact, it seemed to me that the incident went on for about 15 minutes, and I felt breathless and mustered up the courage to ask her to let go, and after a while she obediently pulled away before she opened her mouth to call me by name and express her remorse. Due to the blizzard, she and her Boston coworkers were in a bind, and they unexpectedly spent the night in a hotel. Over a delicious dinner, they raised their glasses and clinked them together, exchanging stories about the successful presentations they had recently held, and talking about their families. She invited him into her room, wanting to give him a physical copy of the presentation since he didn't have one. Immediately remorseful, she admitted that she had made a serious mistake, and he agreed. They promised each other that they would never repeat this terrible act again and pledged to keep it in strictest confidence, while affirming their unwavering love for their spouses. Seeking solace, she said, she took long showers and drank many cans of sparkling water from the minibar, thus suddenly realizing that they had taken no precautions. Emotionally drained, she soon decided to apply for resignation, and that perhaps she would become pregnant because, according to her, she knew that it was an unforgivable act to have an intimate relationship with another man and keep it hidden from me. But she pleaded with me. It suddenly dawned on me that the child in her womb in biology might not be mine. Although I assured her that I would not make any impulsive decisions, I made it clear to her that I could not forgive or erase this behavior from my memory. Eventually, she gave in and said she was willing to fulfill any request I made just to save our marriage. Feeling the need for transparency, I suggested that our young children not be allowed to meet with me just yet, but instead tell their parents about the situation tomorrow, despite her pleas to be spared this ordeal. During the course of the conversation, all 4 parents were visibly saddened and upset, and my wife, who was unable to express herself because of her tears, repeatedly expressed her deep remorse and sincere apologies for her actions, assuring us that she would do everything possible to save our marriage and family. During the conversation with my parents, I said 2 things that greatly hurt my wife and caused her to have an emotional outburst. First, I said that her behavior appeared to be a betrayal of me and our children, and that I wasn't sure it was possible for our marriage to survive. I also emphasized to my wife that it was extremely important to me to get to the bottom of this as soon as possible because, regardless of the results of the tests, this would have a significant impact on our future decisions. I told my wife that I would seek legal help to properly resolve the situation. However, both my wife and I expressed a willingness to be tested, and the doctor placed the order without asking any questions. The next availability was scheduled for Friday. Nonetheless, I made it a rule to cuddle her every night after she fell asleep, and from the time I got home until we went to bed, she snuggled up to me, and her caresses were so intense that my kids couldn't understand why their mom was always hugging me. During the course of the conversation, I suggested that it would be helpful for her to talk to the plaintiffs, but she did not want to see them and emphasized that the betrayal had only happened once, and at the end of the conversation she asked me for advice on what to do next. Afterward, she asked me if I would agree to her attending a meeting with potential attorneys as well as a meeting with the plaintiff's attorney, which I adamantly refused, resulting in her going into the bedroom in tears. The following Thursday, we received the results of the prenatal paternity test, and I received an email in my inbox with a link to a website where I had created an account ahead of time. We clicked on the link and it seemed like an eternity before we scrolled to the results page. I rushed downstairs, hastily grabbed my keys and phone, and fled in my car. Our child was safe with her parents from the dire consequences of the test results. She desperately begged me to come back immediately as she was on the verge of a breakdown. I calmly urged her to try and calm down and promised that we would discuss everything when I returned. During the phone conversation, I found it difficult to explain the details to them, who were deeply saddened and inquired about my plans. I said that, as I had mentioned before, my actions would be to convince CLA to return to her parents' home for the time being in order to protect our children from this turmoil. In addition, I would take immediate steps to expedite the divorce process and instruct my attorney to challenge the alleged paternity under our state's current paternity laws. My attorney had recommended this procedure to avoid having my name as the father on the child's birth certificate. I also asked them not to contact Claire, and if she did contact me, not to discuss the situation with her until I had a chance to talk to her, which they agreed to do, 30 p.m. When I showed up at the door of the house, a full 6 hours after receiving the news, my wife was hugging me with tears in her eyes, and she was holding me tightly, and as we walked to the couch, I gently told her that she would be staying with her parents until the baby was born. In addition, I announced my intention to start divorce proceedings and sell our family home. I emphasized that I was worried about our children, who had seen the trouble that could arise if we continued to live together, although she promised that nothing would be dramatic. I told her that the child in her womb was an innocent angel, completely uninvolved in the messy circumstances created by its parents. I emphasized that this child deserved the chance to be born and live a life full of good things. I encouraged her to talk to the child's father about this issue, while recognizing that adoption is a good option in the right circumstances. My wife expressed deep regret, acknowledged that her decision would haunt her for the rest of her life, and realized that it would not save our marriage. She made it clear that she would take full responsibility for raising the child if I did not want to, and did not expect any support or involvement from me. Despite my deep sadness and despair, I took comfort in the fact that the future of an innocent child was at least somewhat protected. We took a shower, got dressed, had a quick breakfast, and then she started packing and crying nonstop. In a moment of vulnerability, she pleaded with me to change my mind and let her stay in her own home, but I replied firmly that our child was the most important thing to her and that she should make her own decisions. I wanted to approach the situation with enthusiasm and treat this child as my own children's grown-up sister, but in her infancy I thought it would be better for all of us emotionally if I didn't interact with her directly, so I left her with her parents and took my children with me. Even though my wife called and wrote me every day, I only responded to her messages about the children. I decided to take a walk with her to her favorite park and had a heart-to-heart conversation with her during the walk. I explained to her how important her abilities were to her child and newborn. She confided in me and admitted that all she could think about was how she had ruined everything and dreamed of going into a dark closet and never coming out again. After an hour or so of cuddling, she agreed to fulfill my request. The next day, accompanied by her mother and an attorney, she came to a meeting with a lawyer representing the interests of her lover's wife. She contacted me via text message to tell me that the meeting had been very difficult, but ultimately necessary. With a sigh of relief, she told me that the plaintiff had agreed to withdraw the divorce action in exchange for an affidavit in which she would admit the details of her infidelity during her pregnancy. They were ecstatic to learn that my wife had given birth to a healthy baby girl, whom we decided to name Sophie, which matched her real name. 5 months later, she was officially divorced. She thought that giving up everything would be the best proof of her love for me. My ex-wife agreed to the proposal on the condition that I stay within 35 miles of our current city. I could accept this condition because I would not move to another location. I had to explain to them that Sophie had another father who lived in a distant country. Interestingly, my wife's lover was officially divorced a month after our divorce. Your old daughter. Furthermore, he made no attempt to contact my ex-wife or show interest in his own children, even though he was well aware of her existence. Some 3.5 years on, the pain of the divorce and my feelings of betrayal have almost subsided. My children have grown into adults and have easily adapted to their current situation, but the opposite has happened to my ex-wife. The breakdown of our marriage had a negative impact on her mental state and plunged her into deep despair, but thanks to her constant access to a psychotherapist 3 times a week and a variety of medications, she finally recovered after a 2-year journey. Our communication was limited to email conversations related only to the children, while she usually wrote to me 2 or 3 times a week in which she professed her love for me, asked for forgiveness, and expressed her willingness to make every effort to reconcile with me. In the meantime, we seldom had the opportunity to talk privately, but on a rare occasion I tried to tell her that I had received and read all her messages. My mother told me that mentally she still considers herself married to me and sees these messages as a means of maintaining that connection. I made plans to pick up my children on Wednesday and spend time with them on the day their mom was with them. As I was getting ready to leave, my daughter suddenly screamed, "Daddy, look, it's Sophie." I looked up curiously to see an attractive girl with curly blonde hair standing at the edge of the driveway. She was waving at us with one hand and wiping tears from her eyes with the other. "Daddy, she's crying because she wants to come with us." Sophie looked at me and said she wanted to go to the zoo with me. I repeated her words in surprise. "Do you want to go with me?" I asked her if she could let me meet her mom and she agreed. I asked her to smile and she did, showing her perfect baby teeth, which immediately warmed my heart. I don't have many opportunities to interact directly with my wife, but on this particular day, I summoned up the courage to knock decisively on her door, and as I waited, I heard hurried footsteps coming from inside. My wife Claire stood in front of me, overwhelmed with excitement. Oh my God, Sophie! Ben was in tears. My heart was in knots, it hurt like hell. I summoned up my courage and said, "Claire, Sophie would like to go to the zoo. I'd be happy to take her with me. Do you mind?" She nodded her head in agreement and confirmed her promise. Claire wanted to change her daughter's clothes, but I reassured her that she looked fine and suggested that she get a pair of comfortable walking shoes and a jacket. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she carefully placed Sophie in the chair. Cla waved goodbye with tears in her eyes as we slowly pulled out of the driveway. My son supported our conversation by saying how much I enjoyed Sophie's company because she was so nice. Looking at Sophie through the rearview mirror, I couldn't help but sympathize with her, and she responded with a warm smile. Sophie's fear of animals showed throughout, though, and I was glad to be able to hold her in my arms the whole time without complaining. That very day, I developed a deep sympathy for Sophie that I hadn't expected. She seemed to me no longer a lover's child, but the sister of my own child, a girl in need of a father. In the letter, I told her that I wanted Sophie to stay with our child while in custody. I also floated the idea of entering into a legal agreement to facilitate this arrangement and to ensure that I would not have any paternity obligations. Claire replied enthusiastically, convincing me that there was no need for a legal agreement and that I could take Sophie at any time, despite her confidence. Sophie became very attached to me, and I reciprocated her feelings by deliberately sitting next to me whenever we watched TV or ate lunch together. Little Ben affectionately called her Shadow Chef because she was always by my side, and sometimes Sophie preferred to stay with me when her older siblings were out playing. In that moment, my heartstrings were tugged so deeply that I immediately realized that I had to take her forever. By then, she had started kindergarten, and she lovingly drew a beautiful picture of me, which I proudly hung on my wall, and her joy was so great that she asked her grandfather to contact me by phone. I opened the door and invited her inside. After looking around, I curiously asked Sophie, "Who brought you here?" She replied, "Joey, I came running to give you this painting. My grandparents taught me how to cross the street safely, so I now know the way to your house." I dialed my ex-in-laws and asked them not to panic. Sophie was shocked to hear the news at my house. He couldn't believe it because she was playing in one of the rooms while he and my ex-in-laws were planting flowers in the backyard. To celebrate the occasion, we decided to have a delicious dinner at her favorite restaurant. In addition, I mentioned that she should tell us that she wanted to come visit me, and she agreed to those instructions and assured me that she understood everything. She reacted with great joy and hugged me tightly, sincerely agreeing with my decision. We sat on a bench and hugged for an hour, enjoying the moment, her face overflowing with tears of joy as she whispered, "You don't know how much I dreamed and prayed for you to be her father." A year later, Sophie, then 6 years old, officially became my daughter. Looking back, the adoption happened 10 years ago and it is still one of the best choices I have ever made. We are thrilled to announce that our baby is on the way, expected in another 4 months, and will be our 4th child. My ex-wife Claire and I have always had a very friendly relationship. Our 2 eldest children are now at university and our youngest Sophie is 16 years old. Claire is currently single and has not been in any relationship since our divorce. She holds a modest position at the museum, faithfully fulfills her duties, and then quietly passes away. While I'm glad to hear such praise, I hope she finds someone who truly appreciates her, because she truly is a woman with a good heart, despite the mistakes she made nearly 20 years ago. It was a very emotional conversation for both of us, but she understood my situation and was supportive. Even now, I often think about CLA and the consequences of a terrible choice. Unfortunately, Claire still can't get used to the fact that I am married again and have a child with another woman. Sophie often says that her mother cries a lot and sometimes even refuses to eat, and one night CLA called me, sobbing, begging me to come back to her. In addition, she noticed that her memory had deteriorated, and her gynecologist explained that all these health problems were due to a chronic lack of intimacy. As I looked down a busy street, my eyes fell on 4 bulletin boards that proudly displayed the logos of various real estate companies. But my attention quickly turned to one of the 3 houses located across the street that housed Gary and Jessica Spencer, one of the youngest couples in our decent neighborhood, Gary a financial advisor and Jessica a management consultant. Gary gets his workload done without leaving his home, while Jessie travels a lot. On this particular day, as I looked toward the Spencer's house, some activity caught my attention, and curiosity drove me to reach for my binoculars to see a little further. I continued to watch her as she stood there in her panties, and as she gathered up her clothes, Gary kept walking across the room toward the bathroom as I watched. I couldn't help but wonder what was going to happen next. Curiosity gripped me as I thought about the nature of their exchange. The side door opened quietly and she stepped out. Although I couldn't see her from my angle, she turned and kissed someone walking down the road on the lips. She turned back to him and waved before crossing the road carefully. A warm smile tugged at the corner of her mouth as she walked to the door and opened it, and I pricked up my ears to catch the melody she was humming softly. I suddenly notice her jump slightly at the sound of my voice. Her hand instinctively finds comfort in a rather large breast. She turns to meet my eyes. Her surprise is palpable. "Giles, what are you doing here?" she exclaims, panic in her voice. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." "I thought you and the other ladies were familiar with these things. I didn't realize I knew nothing about this situation, and strangely enough I haven't crossed paths with any of the girls since we accompanied Alex to Durham. But you insisted that we stay the night, and I missed the meeting last Monday. I happened to see Sally and Eric in the bar, and there was a lot of tension in their exchange the moment Eric went to the bathroom. Sally came up to me and spilled the beans. It turned out that Eric had been in a relationship many years ago, and Sally hadn't known the disturbing truth until recently when I told Sally the news. I noticed that her face changed, which proved that the Book of Revelation was having a huge impact on my career. I asked her, and she fidgeted again, unable to calm down. "Because you're already home, and I think I'm going to start making dinner. If you don't want to eat dinner out," she replied, and as she walked to the refrigerator, she paused, and then turned and looked at me with a curious expression on her face. I quickly stood up and slung the top part of my leather jacket over my shoulder, gracefully slipped my arms into the sleeves and spun around in front of her before straightening my arms. "Do you agree? I think the color is appropriate. A gentleman your age looks funny in a motorcycle uniform, Besides, you've been out of the military for 12 years and she barely remembers what her husband was really doing. Yes, maybe she's really nice. Living in this house we fulfill our needs and it's safe to say that we lead a fairly comfortable life. I must admit that I have fulfilled my promise to your father to provide you with the usual standard of living, which perhaps exceeds all expectations. While the plates can easily be replaced, there is no guarantee that we will be able to find the same tiles elsewhere, I cautioned. Forget the tiles for a moment, she replied. What kind of midlife crisis is this when you're standing in the skin of a motorcyclist and saying you're retired? I replied calmly. My blow no doubt hit the mark. Out of surprise she stumbled a little. To hold on she grabbed part of the kitchen island for another blow. I continued, by the way, did you hear that Tom and Helena are getting a divorce? I was really surprised when they came here 3 years ago. They seemed to epitomize a young couple in love. Her voice was almost low enough to whisper, which made me ask her to say it again. As she spoke she found a chair and sat down. Have you heard any rumors? What rumors were they? I replied. Her face became paler, hinting at her anxiety, and before she went to the restroom, I thought to myself, maybe I should have another drink soon. I paused for a moment, letting the question hang in mid-air before continuing. We already know 2 connections. Can you think of anything that would tie the other 2 together? She interrupted me abruptly just as I finished. Sorry, I really need to go to the bathroom. She had no makeup on her face, which revealed her true age, and her expression was fragile. Despite this she seemed determined to take an offensive stance as her best defense. I thought you had changed out of that ridiculous costume, she exclaimed in annoyance. Why would you want to do that now? Why do you need it? I continued. What is it? She asked, really confused. After all, the total speed limit is only 70, right? She added, trying to get her head around the situation. I see, it's compensation for another of your little problems, isn't it? Her words alluded to the common stereotype that men buy powerful cars when they feel inferior in other ways. I needed something to replace the adrenaline rush I felt when I jumped out of a plane at 3,000 meters in the air. I paused for a moment as a glint of excitement flashed in her eyes and I couldn't help but laugh. Come on, you're a damn consultant. She teased me for admitting my adventurous attitude. Consultants don't usually engage in activities such as skydiving, but it's all a matter of interpretation. Some people might call us merc-IIEs or soldiers of fortune, but personally I prefer the term safety advisor. You don't know because you're not interested. You've never asked and I don't think you want to know. I explained calmly and she looked at me, her expression changing from confused to contemplative. I paused and looked at her confused expression and continued. Have you ever wondered why some of the injuries I've suffered were treated by a psychiatrist? I asked, trying to dispel your hidden confusion. I explained. Her eyes widened as she realized the meaning of my words. But you broke your leg in Cape Town, she reminded, concern in her voice. You came home on crutches, she nodded. I looked at her, trying to comprehend the weight of the information I had just shared. In that moment, it occurred to me that for the past 20 years, her view of our life together had been comfortable and familiar, that you had been living like a stranger, hiding the true nature of your experience. It's clear that the person she's come to know over the years isn't the person she thought she was. That is the current situation and I am not to be blamed for seeking solace. I must admit that I have not had any support from you. I have never disliked you for your problems, and I have never brought it up. I know it was a major trauma for you, like the one that happened during your stay in Cape Town, right? She asked. Yes, but the mental anguish far outweighed the physical discomfort. Can you at least roughly imagine what it must have been like to be in a foreign country recovering from an operation, and then to find out that your spouse was having an affair with a neighbor? I replied, that's not true, and who could have told you that? I replied that when our daughter walked into the bedroom and she saw you sleeping peacefully next to Eric, the sight broke her heart and she tearfully pleaded with me on the phone not to let our family fall apart. She found solace in my sister, Jenny, who stayed up all night soothing her fragile emotions, and the next day, when Jenny came to me for answers and advice, I offered to fulfill my daughter's wishes. I went on to say that even before I was discharged from the hospital, I had decided never to have physical contact with you again, as I had with my wife. Her brain seemed to be working overtime on the puzzle, but it was clear that she had overlooked an important factor that was eluding her. Why are you revealing all of this to me now? But we still have a chance to change things. I explained. If you retired, we'd have a chance to spend more time together, she said emotionally. So Gary is just picking up the pieces of the mess I've left behind, and it's all because of Tom, Greg, and James? I asked her. Yes, they were just a replacement. I would have preferred it to be you, but you weren't there, and even when you were, you showed no interest. Her answer brought tears to my eyes. Did you ever think to ask me why I did it? I asked her. I think you are going through a difficult time right now, and I don't want to force you to discuss this and cause you the necessary pain, she replied. How attentive you are, dear. I will miss that care. I replied, Carl, you can't divorce me. It would damage your reputation. Divorce is not an option for us. She looked me in the eyes and shouted, trying to see the thoughts hidden within. I asked her. We exchanged vows on a picturesque beach in Bali. She said, do you remember the notarized ceremony we had when we got home? Of course I don't remember, I asked. Why did we have to go through the marriage process twice? That's why I was angry when the financial inspector refused to put your name on my pension, she asked. I must admit that I wanted to talk to you first to resolve the issue, but as I was going through this difficult period, I began to hear disturbing rumors that you were involved with this young subordinate, which I said at the time, but I didn't take it to heart, and as a result, I missed the issue. I calmly looked at her reaction and said, I don't believe you because I think it's just a scam. You can't just give up on a relationship like that, she shouted. Go to your attorney with that question. I'm sure he'll confirm my thoughts, I replied. Isabella's attention was distracted by an unrelated noise, which caused her to quickly go to the window to look out, and it appeared as if the man was driving something onto the lawn. Oh, it seems to have something to do with the realtor's advice, she said excitedly. On the way here I called and listed the house for sale. I said, what about my own situation? What about Alex? She asked, raising her voice. Don't worry about Alex. She's planning a vacation with her father, and I'll do my best to convince her to come and see you. But honestly, you haven't been close in years, have you? You could consider receiving what is known as alimony, which in the U.S. is similar to alimony for an unmarried partner, but I don't know if there is any legal precedent for something similar in our jurisdiction. You could try to claim compensation as a nanny and housekeeper, but if the court notices the large sums you spend each month on clothes and jewelry, it might conclude that you really do owe me. I continued calmly as she sat frozen in her chair with her head in her hands. I can't believe this is happening to me. Do you really hate me that much? I said, and that got her attention, and she raised her head to meet my eyes. You mean to say that in those 4 years she didn't have time to finish her sentence because I interrupted her? Yes, as a military man, I've always had my chances, although I have to admit that lately they haven't been the same as they are now, I said. So you're having another? Yes, I understand that it's not fair to me, especially when you consider that it's me that brought us to be together. She seemed to be shaking slightly and flinching occasionally. It seems that your character doesn't allow you to discuss personal issues with me, but that didn't stop you from sharing this with your friends, especially Jessica, who expressed great sympathy for me and suggested that I contact some people she thought could help me. I continued in the same spirit, assuring her that there was nothing wrong with me, although it was clear that my word alone was not enough for her to believe me. I needed to provide tangible proof which was real, and interestingly enough, she was quite athletic herself. She said sarcastically that I could have asked you similar questions to Gary, as he found tea attractive at least twice a week. Perhaps I should apologize for that comment. The pounding of the hammer was replaced by a muffled grunt. Looks like it's my motorcycle, I said, picking up my helmet and heading for the front door. As she removed her helmet, her bright red hair cascaded over her shoulders. This motorcycle is very intimidating. I can see why you chose it, and maybe I should envy you, but my dear, when it comes to exciting adventures, there is nothing quite like what happened to you. You and I make a great team, don't we? Nonetheless, our mission here is coming to an end, and it's time to move on to the grand finale. The realtor finishes up on my board and begins to drive stakes onto Spencer's lawn without her noticing my wife's presence. Hello, Isabella, can I ask you a favor? Gary was feeling uncomfortable, and Isabella seemed speechless as Jessica spoke up for her. When we arrive at Spencer's house, we see that Gary is in the middle of a heated argument with the man in charge of installing the bulletin board, and when a motorcycle pulls up in front of the door, his expression quickly shifts to one of confusion, and his surprise intensifies when his wife gets out of the back seat. she pleaded, and a look of confusion crossed Gary's face as he tried to make sense of the situation at hand. Jessica said, and Gary Frozen's mouth dropped open as he considered her words. Don't worry, honey, she reassured him. Isabella has agreed to take care of you, so my absence from you is not going to be noticed. Now, be a good man and go back inside and let the gentleman do his business. Without even opening the envelope, Gary turned and walked slowly toward the side door. Jessie Boughton got dressed and put on her helmet and joined me on the motorcycle. No sooner had we pulled out of the gate than a voice came over the intercom in the helmet. The girl was worried and said, "Don't be afraid. I'll keep on massaging your ass if you feel sick." "How long is the ride to France?" 00. She asked me to rent an apartment. I was suddenly tapped playfully on the shoulder. She said fondly, "You are such a naughty person. I like you a lot," and as her arms encircled my waist and her curves pressed against my back, I realized that this day was worth waiting for. Our journey to marriage began as students when I was 23 and she was 21, and we immediately realized we were meant to be together. I spent my childhood on a farm, as did my brother, whom I call Bill. Bill was 3 years younger than me, and instead of pursuing a higher education like I did, he focused on working as a laborer on the farm. There were 3 residential buildings on the farm, which covered about 700 acres. The main building was some distance from the main road and served as both my parents' home and the company office. My brother Leif lived in a charming apartment building conveniently located at the intersection of the driveway and the main road. This additional land was purchased by my parents as part of a business to expand the farm and preserve the historic value of the farmhouse. All 3 houses are owned by the family farm company, and my brother and I have the opportunity to live in them. Considering that I was actively involved in the management of the farm along with my regular job, I was given a controlling interest, but it should be noted that I did not receive any compensation for my work. We enjoyed the privilege of living in the house without paying rent, and it was clear that I would eventually inherit the controlling interest. Age son, my career and the family farm are thriving. I believe I have provided enough information to give you a clear picture of the situation, so let me now turn to the main reason for my appeal. Unfortunately, he never cared about his health and only sought help from his doctor when the symptoms became unbearable. Unfortunately, Bill passed away earlier this year, leaving a legacy of regret for all who knew him. The news of his death had a particular impact on me as he had looked up to me as a role model for many years, and I had always been there to support him and help him overcome his various difficulties. I had the privilege of helping Bill overcome his personal demons. Not only did he struggle with alcohol addiction, but he also faced serious tax issues that I helped him with. Bill was the type of person who had a hard time coping with the basic tasks of life, and I was often there to help him, and as a result our relationship became stronger and we became incredibly close. At one point he was dating a very beautiful girl and I had high hopes for their future. Unfortunately, his overzealousness with alcohol led to her decision to leave him. As a testament to our closeness, Bill entrusted me with the administration of his estate, as he had stated in his will, and named me as the sole heir to his property. The property consisted of a life insurance policy, a small checking account, as well as his belongings, a motorcycle and a truck. I was shocked by the amount of the account balance, but even more shocking to me were the names listed on the statement. The account was registered in Bill's name, but to my surprise, my youngest son, I'll call him Joe, was listed as the sole heir to receive the inheritance if he died. As I realized this fact, my mind began to race, desperately trying to find an explanation for such an unexpected scenario, and despite my racing thoughts, I could not find a rational reason for Bill's decision. The next day I went to the bank where, as the appointed executor, I was authorized to gather more information. I discovered that just a month after Joe was born, Bill had opened a money market account. An annoying question arose: could Bill be having an affair with my wife, Connie, and was Joe Bill's biological son? Just the thought of such a scenario sent my mind into a frenzy, driving me to the brink of insanity, and I came across 2 old photographs of my wife, one of which showed my wife topless, and the other of which showed my wife disheveled with a beer in her hand, both of which had been taken in Bill's bedroom. I decided not to see her right away because I needed time to realize the seriousness of what I had discovered. In addition, I even considered choosing to ignore the unpleasant facts, even though the photos were taken several years ago and my brother had died. After presenting them with the evidence, I told them of the existence of the bank account and showed them the photographs of my wife. My parents were shocked and discouraged by the discovery. They shared my illness and fully understood the gravity of the situation. Their concerns mirrored mine. They were interested in my further actions and asked me what I intended to do. Although my parents were sympathetic to my decision, my mother suggested that I give Connie a chance to explain herself and think carefully about her behavior before taking further action. When we entered the room, I sat Connie down in a chair and began the difficult conversation that was to come, and having made up my mind, I produced a package containing a bank statement and photographs of the defendant. I took the opportunity to suggest that she study the statement more closely and asked her if she noticed anything unusual. Connie's voice trembled slightly as she began to read the bank statement and continued as she read the name and address of the bank. I asked her if she needed to admit to anything. She shook her head firmly and denied her guilt. Skeptically, I pressed her again to find out if she was sure. Her answer was unchanged. She confirmed her innocence and accepted her answer, but with reservations. I reluctantly agreed and said yes. As I handed Connie the photographs, she suddenly felt a sense of bondage and tears streamed down her face. I listened to her patiently, hoping to bring at least a glimmer of clarity to her emotions. Connie soon realized the seriousness of her actions, repented of her mistakes, and convinced me that she soon stopped the affair and, according to her, realized the seriousness of what was going on and distanced herself from Bill, communicating with him only in family meetings. Aware of Connie's attempts to divert attention from her relationship with Bill to her relationship with Joe, I firmly reminded her that this was about her behavior and her relationship with Bill, and watched as her tears flowed and she desperately begged for forgiveness, but I remained adamant and did not give her the opportunity to show sympathy or comfort. I emphasized the need to protect our children from witnessing her current condition. After leaving her, I returned home, and after about an hour, she regained her composure and put herself in order despite Connie's insistence on talking. The next day I took a day off work and went to the main house to see my parents, where I again talked about Connie's confession, which left my parents totally confused and unable to accept the fact. When my mother asked me about my true desires, I admitted that I didn't want a divorce, but when I found out how serious Connie's behavior was, I realized that I could never trust her or have a close relationship with her again. I reiterated to Connie that Joe's involvement in this matter would not affect my life or his, regardless of who Joe's biological father was. I emphasized that her betrayal hurt me deeply and that what happened 18 years ago or a century ago didn't matter to me at all. Later that day, I sought advice from our trusted attorney who handles cases related to our farm. In addition, he told me that since my wife was not working outside the home, I would most likely be required to pay spousal support for at least 5 years and even longer in the future. I prepared myself mentally because for me the financial issues were not the main problem. My main goal was to get out of my marriage. When I got home, I broke the news to Connie and she reacted very violently, sobbing uncontrollably and begging me to give her another chance, but I remained firm in my decision. Saturday morning I found Joe and explained that I needed to discuss something important with him. Together we went down to the creek on the farm where there was a gazebo and picnic benches. In this serene atmosphere, I broke the news to him as I had hoped. I told him without hesitation that my love for him would not change under any circumstances. I said that Joe should not even think that his biological lineage would affect our relationship. I emphasized that whether or not he or one of his siblings was my biological son would not change my love for them or my connection to them. I made it clear that the situation was only relevant to me and to his mother, and that his siblings are not to blame. I reiterated that my decision to divorce Connie was solely because of her affair with Uncle Bill and had absolutely nothing to do with Joe. We spent several hours having an honest conversation about the issues, comforting and supporting each other. When we got home, we resumed our usual routine, but there was a noticeable change in my wife's demeanor, which our children noticed immediately. The next day we got up and had breakfast together, and as usual the whole family went to Sunday service, after which we returned home to prepare for the important conversation that was about to begin. I gathered the children on a secluded back patio and explained that I needed to talk to them alone. It was with a heavy heart that I shared the news with them, and watching the expressions on their faces was as overwhelming as it was expected to be. At first, they barely knew what was going on and went from disbelief to anger to sadness. I told them that they were both adults and could act as they saw fit in this situation, but I asked them to listen to their mother and not to make judgments based solely on this incident. Instead, I encouraged them to consider all of their relationships, which were predominantly positive, when evaluating their mother, and even though they both agreed, their anger was still palpable, and neither of them wanted to see her. Nonetheless, I convinced them that even if it turned out that some of them weren't my biological children, it wouldn't change my love and concern for them because they were all legally my children. My wife witnessed all of this, but she understood the gravity of her actions and their consequences throughout the divorce process. My wife preferred to sleep in the guest room to keep the distance between us. About 3 months after our first blow of separation, an unexpected opportunity arose when my parents were approached by a developer with a lucrative offer to purchase our family home and the adjoining 80 acres of land. During this difficult time, I temporarily moved in with my parents in search of stability. At this time, I decided to fulfill my old dream of building my dream house on the secluded part of our family farm. I now live in this quiet house with my 2 young children, who also spend a few nights a week with their mother, who still struggles with depression but is gradually recovering. Nonetheless, I respect her because I realize I have a responsibility to her as the children's mother, but I feel deprived of any emotional attachment to her. As for the DNA test, the results showed that all of my children are not biologically mine. I love them as much as ever, but I treated Connie like a stranger and her betrayal of me was profound and something I can never forget or fully forgive. My ex-wife insisted that they had never discussed the issue of paternity, and I was inclined to believe her on this one. Perhaps Bill had simply made a suggestion or harbored a wish, perhaps Connie had somehow made it clear that Joe was his own, and Connie was so shocked when she realized that all of the children weren't biologically mine that she pleaded with the children to forgive her, but none of them would talk to her, and they, like I was shocked by the news. As time went on, she started having problems with her stomach and lost a lot of weight. Even when I forced her to eat, she would run to the toilet and vomit everything she ate out of her mouth. I don't know how to deal with this. I'm just tired of forcing her to eat if she doesn't want to. It's been a long time since I saw her start vomiting uncontrollably, and now she's in serious condition and under the supervision of a doctor. I don't know how much longer she's going to live, but all of our children refuse to visit her and it makes me very sad.